The kingdom of Alaris was a place that clung to old beliefs the way a frightened child clings to a blanket. People followed strict traditions, whispered warnings in the night, and bowed their heads when talk of dreamers came up. To them, dreamers brought danger, omens of storms, sickness, or death. And no one feared dreamers more than the ones who carried the gift themselves. Aveline knew this fear well. She had lived with it her entire life. At 17, she was quiet and gentle, the kind of girl who tried to stay unnoticed in a world that watched too closely. She helped her mother in their small home on the edge of town and rarely raised her voice. But inside her, something stirred, something she never asked for, something she couldn't control. Her dreams. They weren't normal dreams filled with childish stories or wandering thoughts. They were sharp, vivid, almost painfully real. Sometimes she saw small things like a cup falling moments before it happened. Other times she saw strangers' faces, danger in their eyes, long before they arrived in town. She tried to ignore the dreams, pretend they meant nothing, but they clung to her mind like shadows that refused to leave. Alaris had not forgotten the dark tragedy of the past, a dreamer whose visions once warned of a coming war. Instead of listening, people panicked. They blamed the dreamer, and when the war came anyway, many said it happened because of the vision, not in spite of it. Since then, anyone with such a gift was viewed as a curse. Aveline carried that curse alone. She walked through life with careful steps, always afraid someone might look too closely and see the truth in her eyes. She longed to belong, to laugh freely, to sleep without fear of waking up knowing something terrible was coming. But belonging felt like a dream she would never be allowed to have. One night, everything changed. She woke trembling, her breath sharp and uneven. The dream still burned vividly behind her eyes, flames rising over the kingdom walls, smoke twisting into the sky, people screaming as the ground cracked beneath them. A masked figure stood at the center of the destruction, watching the kingdom fall. Aveline pressed her hands over her mouth to stop herself from crying out. She knew what she had seen. She knew it was a warning. But she also knew she could not tell a single soul. Not if she wanted to survive. The days after Aveline's nightmare felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself carried a warning. The sun rose weak and pale, and the wind seemed colder than it should have been. People in Alaris whispered that something was wrong, though no one knew what. The first sign came from the fields. Farmers returned from their work with worried faces, carrying handfuls of wilted crops. Wheat that once stood tall now drooped and crumbled at a touch. Vegetables rotted before they were pulled from the soil. Even the animals grew restless, refusing to eat. Then the news spread to the palace. The king's health was failing. Rumors swept through the kingdom like wildfire. Some said the crops were cursed. Others blamed the sudden storms that rolled across the sky, bringing thunder in the middle of clear afternoons and hail that smashed rooftops. Every strange event added to the fear, tightening a grip around Alaris that no one could escape. And through it all, Aveline's dreams grew stronger, clearer, more frightening. Night after night, she saw masked figures walking through dark hallways. She saw the king's throne cracking down the center, splitting like old wood. She saw a shadow spreading across the land, swallowing light wherever it touched. She woke with her heart pounding, her hands shaking, and a cold sweat covering her skin. She tried to ignore it. She tried to pretend everything was fine, but she couldn't. One morning, after another awful dream, Aveline gathered her courage and spoke quietly to a fellow servant, someone she thought she could trust. I feel like something bad is coming, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've seen things in my sleep, strange things. The servant's face stiffened. Their eyes flicked toward the door, as if expecting someone to be listening. You shouldn't say things like that, they whispered. People are scared enough already. Aveline bit her lip. I'm only trying to help. But the servant stepped back, their expression uneasy. Just don't talk about dreams. Not now. Aveline walked away with a heavy heart. She didn't know that the servant hurried down the hallway moments later, whispering her words to someone else. By evening, the palace was buzzing with quiet talk. Did you hear? She's been dreaming again. She said something terrible was coming. Dreamers only bring bad luck. Aveline felt the stares before she saw them. Servants she had known for years kept their distance. Some stopped talking when she entered a room. Others looked at her with hidden fear, as if she carried sickness in her hands. She tried to brush it off, but the uneasy silence followed her everywhere. Meanwhile, the High Council gathered to discuss the kingdom's troubles. Desperate for answers, they began questioning villagers and servants, searching for someone to blame. Old stories about dreamers resurfaced, tales of curses, death, and destruction. Fear wanted a target, and Aveline's name was already being passed from mouth to mouth. One night, as she returned home, Aveline overheard two guards speaking near the palace gate. Someone said she admitted it herself. One whispered, said she sees things before they happen. Then she's dangerous, the other replied. We can't have that here. Aveline froze, her stomach twisting. She hadn't meant to confess anything. She only wanted to help. But now her words were twisted into something frightening. When she stepped inside her home, her mother looked at her with quiet worry, hands trembling slightly as she set down a bowl. Aveline, she said softly, tell me you haven't been speaking about your dreams. Aveline lowered her eyes. I only told one person. Her mother closed her eyes in fear. Oh, child, they won't understand. Aveline swallowed hard. The weight of betrayal, of being misunderstood, settled deep in her chest. She had tried to help. She had tried to warn them. But all she had done was paint a target on her own back. And somewhere inside her, a terrible truth began to grow. The kingdom feared her more than the darkness she dreamed of. Aveline woke before sunrise the next morning, but something felt wrong. The air was too still. The house was too quiet. Even the birds outside seemed afraid to sing. Then came the heavy knock on the door. Her mother answered it with shaking hands. Two palace guards stood in the doorway, armored and stern. Their eyes did not soften when they saw Aveline. Aveline of Alaris, one of them said, you are summoned to the royal court. You are to come at once. Her mother's breath caught. Please, she whispered, she has done nothing wrong. The guard only repeated, at once. Aveline forced herself to stand tall, though her knees trembled. She followed the guards out into the morning mist, her heart pounding as she walked through streets she had known all her life. Now the people standing outside their homes looked at her with pity or fear. Whispers followed her like shadows. Dreamer, bad luck, she brought this on us. She kept her eyes forward, afraid that if she looked anywhere else, she would break. When they reached the palace, the doors opened with a groaning echo. The throne room was dim, lit only by a few torches along the walls. The king sat slumped on his throne, his face pale and drawn from illness. Around him stood the High Council, nobles dressed in deep colors, their expressions sharp and skeptical. Aveline stepped forward as the guards announced her name. Her voice felt trapped in her chest, but she forced herself to bow. Rise, one councilman said coldly. We have questions for you. Aveline lifted her gaze. The council members stared at her as if she were a dangerous creature, not a frightened girl. We have heard rumors, another councilwoman said. Rumors of visions, dreams that speak of danger. Aveline swallowed. I have dreams sometimes. I cannot control them. You admit it, then, someone muttered. Her pulse quickened. I only wanted to help. I didn't try to harm anyone. But the council was already leaning in, their fear twisting her words into threats. What do you see in these dreams? One demanded. Darkness, she whispered. Fire. A fall that has not yet happened. A wave of unease moved through the room. Even the king, weak as he was, opened his eyes a little wider. You see chaos, a councilman said. You see destruction, and such things have begun to happen here. That is not because of me, Aveline cried, her voice cracking. I dream of what may come, not what I wish for. I only want to protect the kingdom. Her honesty did not soften their faces. It hardened them. You admit you see the downfall of Alaris, a noble said sharply. What greater danger is there than a girl who claims to dream the kingdom's death? Aveline felt her breath shorten. Please, I do not control these visions. But whispers rose among the nobles, fearful, accusing, hungry for someone to blame. The king lifted his head weakly. Enough, we must decide. The council closed in around him, whispering, debating, drowning Aveline in their frightened voices. At last, the king spoke with great effort. "This girl, her dreams, they invite ruin," he said slowly, his voice trembling. "But she is young. I will not order her death." Aveline felt a moment of relief, until the councilman beside him continued. "Then we offer mercy. She is to be banished beyond the kingdom's borders. She will cross into the Wraithlands by nightfall and never return." Aveline's heart dropped. The Wraithlands were a place people spoke of only in warnings, a land of storms, empty wastelands, and strange echoes, a place no one survived alone. She stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. "You cannot, please." But the guards had already stepped forward. Her mother, who had been waiting at the edge of the room, cried out, rushing toward her. "She is only a child. She has done nothing wrong." The guard held her back gently, but firmly. Aveline's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. Fear, anger, and heartbreak tangled inside her until she could barely breathe. She looked once at the king, sick, weary, frightened, and realized he feared her just as much as the rest. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I only wanted to help." But her words echoed into silence. The guards led her out of the palace and through the city one final time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in burning colors, almost like the fire she had seen in her dream. People watched from their windows, some with regret, others with relief. At the kingdom's edge, Aveline paused. Behind her lay the only life she had ever known. Ahead of her stretched the dark, endless Wraithlands. She wiped her tears, lifted her chin, and stepped forward. She walked into exile with trembling legs, but with a quiet, growing fire inside her. They feared her dreams, but they had no idea how much they would one day need them. The Wraithlands greeted Aveline with nothing but wind and silence, an empty, endless silence that felt like it could swallow a person whole. The moment she crossed the border stones, the air changed. It felt colder, sharper, as if invisible eyes were watching her. Behind her, the kingdom lights faded into the distance. Ahead, only shadows waited. Aveline wrapped her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders and kept walking, though every step felt heavier. The ground was dry and cracked. Strange, twisted trees reached toward the sky like broken fingers. The wind howled through them, making a sound almost like voices whispering her name. By nightfall, her legs ached and her throat burned with thirst. She found a small cave for shelter, but sleep did not come easily. When she finally drifted into a restless doze, the dreams returned. Flashes of fire, a masked figure, the king's crown falling to the ground. She woke shaking, her heart racing, her breath cold in the air. For a moment, she thought she truly was alone in a dead world. But the next morning, as she stumbled through a stretch of jagged rocks, she heard footsteps behind her. "Aveline, is it?" a calm voice said. She spun around, ready to run, but froze when she saw a group of 5 people standing a short distance away. They looked rough and worn, their clothes patched and faded, but their eyes were steady, not cruel, not fearful, just curious. The one who had spoken was an older woman with silver strands in her dark hair. She raised her hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. "We're not here to hurt you," she said. "We're like you." Aveline's chest tightened. "Like me?" "Different," another man said, stepping forward. "Banished for gifts we didn't ask for." He held out a hand, and a small flame flickered above his palm before vanishing. Aveline gasped softly. "We are called the Remnants," the woman said. "Those Alaris throws away. We saw you wandering alone. Come with us. You won't last long out here otherwise." Aveline hesitated. After everything, how could she trust anyone? But something in their eyes gave her a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. She nodded. The Remnants led her through hidden paths until they reached a sheltered valley surrounded by stone walls. There were tents, a fire pit, and even small gardens growing against all odds. It wasn't much, but it felt more like a home than anything Aveline had seen since leaving Alaris. Over the next days, she learned their names and their stories. Leora, the silver-haired woman, had healing hands that scared the nobility. Terran, the man with the flame, once served in the King's Guard. Sala could read emotions with unsettling accuracy. Diran saw distant places in his mind. And Mira, the youngest, could sense storms before they arrived. Every one of them had been banished for being too unusual, too powerful, or too dangerous. Yet none of them judged Aveline. They listened when she described her dreams. They sat with her when fear shook her voice. They didn't treat her like a curse. For the first time, she felt understood. But peace never lasted long for her. One night, as the group slept, Aveline felt a strange pull, like a hand reaching inside her mind. She fell into a deep dream, far stronger than any she had experienced before. She saw the kingdom again, but this time the vision was clearer. Masked figures moved through secret tunnels beneath the palace. The king lay in bed, his lips pale, not from illness, but from poison. A countdown echoed in her mind. Days left, maybe only a handful. Then she saw the throne crack, and flames rising high into the sky. She woke with a scream. The remnants rushed to her side as she gasped for breath, tears streaming down her face. Leora held her gently. "What did you see?" she whispered. Aveline forced herself to speak, though her voice shook. "Alaris is in danger. A group? A cult. They're planning to destroy everything. The king isn't sick. He's being poisoned. And soon, very soon, they will strike." Silence fell over the remnants. They exchanged tense looks. "Then you must go back," Terran said firmly. "They need to be warned." Aveline's heart pounded. "They banished me. They won't listen. They'll think I'm lying or dangerous." Leora cupped her face gently. "Your dreams may save them, even if they don't deserve you." Aveline looked at the firelight flickering across their faces. These exiles, these strangers, believed in her more than her own people ever had. The thought cut deep, both painful and comforting. Fear pressed against her chest, but beneath it, something stronger began to rise, a sense of purpose. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "What if they reject me again?" "Then you'll come back to us," Mira said quietly. "You're not alone anymore." Aveline inhaled shakily and nodded. For the first time, she wasn't running from her dreams. She was going to follow them. The kingdom needed her, even if it didn't know it yet. Aveline left the Wraithlands before sunrise, carrying nothing but a small pack and the courage she had gathered from the remnants. The air felt heavier as she walked, as though the land itself sensed the danger waiting ahead. Every step toward Alaris made her pulse quicken. She feared what she might find, yet feared even more what would happen if she didn't go back at all. By the time the border stones came into view, her heart was hammering. She paused at the edge, remembering how the guards had dragged her past them, treating her as if she were something wild. Now she crossed over on her own terms. But the moment her foot touched Alaris soil again, the shouts began. "Halt! Identify yourself!" Before she could speak, a group of soldiers surrounded her, their spears raised. Their armor gleamed, but their faces were pale with worry. She raised her hand slowly. "It's me," she said. "Aveline. I need to see the council. It's urgent." The captain stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You were banished. By order of the High Council. You have no right to." "This is about the king," she cut in. "He's not sick. He's being poisoned." The soldiers froze, their expressions twisting from anger to disbelief. One of them muttered, "How could she know that?" Another tightened his grip on his spear. The captain let out a cold laugh. "You expect us to believe you? A dreamer who nearly caused panic." "I'm telling the truth," she insisted. "Your kingdom is days away from disaster." The captain gave a sharp signal, and 2 soldiers seized her arms. "We'll take you in, but only as a prisoner." Aveline wanted to fight, but she didn't. If being dragged in was the only way to warn them, she would endure it. Her wrists were bound, and she was marched through the gates of Alaris. As she entered the city, she saw what her dreams had tried to show her: fear. Shops were closed. Families hurried indoors. Whispered rumors floated through the streets like cold wind. Something was very wrong, even without the cult attacking yet. When the soldiers shoved her through the heavy doors of the council hall, every counselor turned to stare. Gasps echoed off the marble walls. Some rose from their seats. Others recoiled as if she carried a disease. Counselor Branton, the man who had pushed hardest for her banishment, stood up slowly, his face twisting with fury and surprise. "You dare return?" he hissed. Aveline lifted her chin. "Only because your lives are in danger." "Silence!" Branton thundered. "You were exiled for your lies." "Guards! Counselor!" A firm voice cut him off. It belonged to Lady Sarah, one of the few counselors who had hesitated during Aveline's trial. She watched Aveline carefully, not with fear, but with something closer to concern. "Aveline," she said quietly, "explain yourself." Aveline swallowed hard. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "The king is being poisoned. A group, hidden, organized, is preparing to bring down the palace. I saw it. Days ago. Last night. They're moving quickly. If you don't search the palace and watch the people closest to the king, you will lose him." The hall erupted into whispers. Branton slammed his hand on the table. "Dreams again? This girl nearly caused riots with her stories." Aveline stepped forward. "I never meant to cause harm. But everything I saw, it's happening. You can feel it in the streets. You know something is wrong." Her words hung in the air, heavy and alive. Lady Sarah pressed her lips together. "Where did you get this information?" Aveline hesitated. She didn't want to endanger the remnants. "I saw signs in the Wraithlands. I pieced things together." Brandon scoffed. "You expect us to trust someone who consorts with banished criminals?" Aveline's heart twisted. She wanted to shout that the remnants were better people than most in this hall, but she held her tongue. Finally, after a long, tense pause, Lady Sarah spoke. "Whether we believe her or not, the king's condition has grown worse," she said, "and there have been strange movements in the palace corridors." Branton's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "We will investigate," Sarah said sharply. Quietly, Branton clenched his jaw but didn't argue further. The counselors murmured among themselves. 2 guards stepped behind Aveline, waiting for the order to take her away. Sarah looked at her one last time. "If your warning proves false, you will face punishment harsher than exile. But if it is true," Aveline nodded, "then you'll see I came back to save the kingdom, not destroy it." The council hall erupted into motion. Orders were given. Messengers ran. Guards hurried to the palace. Aveline stood there, unbroken and unbowed, still uncertain, still afraid, but ready for whatever came next. The kingdom didn't want her, but it needed her. The council's investigation began before sunrise the next day, but the kingdom felt as though it was already sinking into darkness. A heavy fog clung to the streets, muffling footsteps and swallowing sound. Even the birds were silent, as if the whole land sensed the danger creeping closer. Aveline watched from a guarded chamber inside the palace, her wrists still bound. She paced back and forth, each minute stretching like an hour. Waiting felt harder than exile itself. She had done everything she could. Now it was in their hands. But doubt gnawed at her. What if the council dismissed her warning? What if the cult struck before anyone could stop them? A knock sounded at the door. A guard stepped in, followed by Lady Sarah. "The council found something," Sarah said quietly. Aveline froze. "What?" Sarah closed the door behind her. "The king's healer is missing. His quarters were ransacked, and we found traces of a rare poison in the king's medicine basin." Aveline's knees almost gave out. She steadied herself on the table. "So it's true," she whispered. "They really are trying to kill him." Sarah nodded. "This doesn't prove everything you claimed, but it confirms enough. The palace is tightening security, and we are questioning everyone on the staff." Aveline hoped that would be enough, but deep in her chest, she knew the cult wouldn't stop so easily. As the morning passed, tension rippled through the palace. Guards patrolled every corridor. Doors that were usually open were suddenly locked. Servants hurried with wide, fearful eyes. The quiet fear outside the palace now pulsed through its heart. Aveline felt it like a storm building in the air. Hours later, another guard arrived. "The High Council is meeting again," he said. Lady Sarah has asked you to join them." Aveline's breath caught. She followed the guard through the marble halls. As she walked, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Strange patterns carved into the walls, symbols she didn't recognize. Some looked newly etched. A chill ran through her. When she entered the council hall, the mood was even worse than before. Papers were scattered across the table. Counselors argued in sharp, terrified whispers. Branton looked furious, as if the truth itself offended him. Sarah gestured for silence. "Aveline, tell us again exactly what you saw in your dreams. Every detail." Aveline stepped forward. Her palms were sweating. "I saw masked figures moving through hidden tunnels beneath the palace. I saw fire rising from inside the walls. I saw the king lying still, poisoned." And her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "I saw the throne collapsing." Branton slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough of this nonsense." But another counselor stood. "We searched the old maps. There are tunnels beneath the palace. Most have been sealed for decades, but not all." Shocked murmurs filled the room. "And there's more," the counselor continued. "Some of the symbols found on the palace walls match markings seen in the old rebellion. Symbols used by a group that tried to overthrow the monarchy." Aveline felt the temperature drop. "That's them," she said. "Those are the people in my dreams." Branton still looked unconvinced, but his face had gone pale. Lady Sarah turned to the council. "We must act. If these threats are real, we have little time." The counselors whispered urgently among themselves. Then Aveline felt something strange, a sharp tug in her mind, like a warning. Her vision blurred for an instant. She blinked, and suddenly she wasn't in the council hall anymore. She stood in one of her dreams. Dark tunnels stretched before her. Masked figures whispered and prepared torches. A single voice hissed orders. "Tonight, when the moon reaches its peak." Then the vision snapped away, leaving her gasping. She clutched the edge of the table. "They're coming tonight," she said. "The attack is happening tonight." The council hall fell into stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. Branton shouted for immediate lockdown. Messengers raced through the halls. Guards were ordered to every entrance, every tunnel, every rooftop. The kingdom had reached its breaking point, and Aveline knew one thing for certain. If they didn't find the cult before the moon rose, Alaris would fall. Night dropped over Alaris like a heavy curtain, hiding the city in deep shadows. Only the palace burned with light, torches glowing along every wall, every tower. From a distance, it looked strong, untouched. But inside, fear moved through the halls like a quiet wind. Aveline hurried behind Lady Sarah and a group of guards as they made their way toward the old storage wings beneath the palace. Her heart raced with every step. She could feel the dreams still pulsing in her mind. The narrow tunnels, the masked figures, the fire waiting to rise. "They'll come from below," Aveline said, trying to steady her breath. "That's where they're gathering." Sarah nodded, her face tight with worry. "We sealed most entrances, but some of the old ones are still open. If they know the palace maps better than we do, they'll already be inside," Aveline finished. They reached a rusted iron door at the far end of the hallway. Two soldiers pushed it open, revealing a stairway leading into darkness. The air smelled damp and stale, like dust that had been waiting for years to be disturbed. Torches were lit, weapons drawn. Aveline followed the group down. Each step echoed through the stone passage. The walls were covered in faded paint and carvings of old battles the kingdom barely remembered. Now, they looked like warnings rather than history. Halfway down the stairs, Aveline gasped. A rush of vision hit her, mass silhouettes rushing up the same steps, blades glinting, torches burning. "They're close," she whispered. "Closer than we think." The guards tightened their formation, shields up. Sarah moved to Aveline's side. At the bottom of the steps, the tunnel split into 3 paths. "Which way?" a guard asked. Aveline closed her eyes. She tried to let the dream settle, to pull her forward the way it always did when danger stirred. For a moment, nothing came. Only fear, only doubt. Then a flash. A masked figure turning left. Ash drifting in the air. The sound of steel on stone. The left path, she said. That's where they are. The guards moved quickly. They followed the winding tunnel until they heard voices, soft at first, then growing louder. Chanting, a slow, rising chant that crawled under Aveline's skin. The cult was here. Sarah raised her hand, signaling for silence. The group edged forward until the tunnel opened into a wide chamber beneath the throne room. Pillars rose like broken teeth. Dozens of masked figures stood in a circle around a small metal brazier, their torches forming a ring of firelight. In the center lay a map of the palace floor, spread out on the ground and marked with black ink. Aveline saw it in an instant. It matched her dreams exactly. "We strike now," Sarah whispered. Before the guards could move, a sharp crack split the air. A torch exploded, sending sparks flying. The cult members turned as one. "Intruders!" a masked leader shouted. "Stop them!" Chaos shattered the chamber. Guards rushed forward with shields raised. The cult charged, meeting them in a clash of steel and fire. Screams echoed off the walls. Torches dropped and rolled, lighting small fires across the dusty floor. Aveline stumbled back as a masked attacker lunged toward her. Before the blade could reach her, Sarah blocked the strike and shoved the attacker aside. "Stay close to me," she yelled. But Aveline couldn't stay still. She saw something out of the corner of her eye, a narrow passage where two cult members dragged heavy crates marked with strange runes. Explosives. Her heart jumped in her throat. "They're planning to collapse the palace," she cried. Sarah spun toward her. "Go. Warn the others." Aveline ran. Her legs felt weak, but fear pushed her forward. She raced past fallen torches, past fighting guards, past shadows that moved like living things. The smaller tunnel opened into another chamber. Inside, cult members were stacking the crates beneath the stone supports of the palace. "No," she whispered. "I have to stop this." She grabbed a fallen torch and swung it at the nearest crate. A cultist lunged toward her, but she ducked and rolled aside. The torch hit the crate, scattering powder across the floor. The cultists hissed in anger. Aveline scrambled to her feet. "You won't destroy this kingdom," she said, her voice shaking but strong. One raised a blade, but before he could strike, a guard burst into the chamber and tackled him. More guards followed, flooding into the room. Sarah appeared, breathless and tense. "Aveline, are you hurt?" Aveline shook her head. "They wanted to bring the palace down. We can still stop them if we move fast." Sarah turned to the guards. "Destroy the crates. Secure every tunnel." The guards moved quickly, scattering the explosives and capturing the cultists who tried to escape. Slowly, painfully, the battle began to shift. The chanting died away. The screams quieted. The fires were smothered. At last, the chamber fell silent. Aveline let out a long, shaking breath. Her entire body trembled. She felt both weak and strangely weightless. They had stopped the attack, but she knew this wasn't the end. Some cult members had escaped deeper into the tunnels. Some secrets were still hidden. And the leader, the masked figure in her dreams, had not been caught. Aveline lifted her gaze to the ceiling above them, imagining the throne room standing just beyond the stone. "The kingdom isn't safe yet," she whispered. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, but tonight you saved it from falling." Aveline closed her eyes. She hoped it was true. Smoke drifted through the early morning air as the sun tried to break through a gray sky. The palace still stood, but its halls were scarred and blackened. Burn marks crawled along the walls like old wounds. The scent of ash hung over everything. Aveline walked slowly through the courtyard, her steps unsteady. Every part of her body ached. Her legs, her arms, even her voice. She felt like a candle burned down to its wick. The night's battle replayed in her mind in sharp flashes. Blades striking stone, masked figures shouting, the fire creeping closer to the surface. But the kingdom was alive. That thought kept her moving. Guards bowed their heads as she passed. Not in fear this time, but in respect. Some even stepped back to give her space, whispering her name with something close to gratitude. It felt strange, almost unreal. Aveline had spent years being ignored or avoided. Now the same people treated her like she was something powerful, something important. She wasn't sure how she felt about it. At the entrance to the throne room, Lady Sarah met her with a tired smile. "The king is awake," she said softly. "He wants to see you." Aveline's stomach tightened. She wasn't afraid of him now, not the way she had been during her trial, but the thought of facing him again made her heart beat faster. Still, she nodded and followed Sarah inside. The throne room was dim, lit only by a few small lamps. The king sat on a cushioned chair instead of his throne, wrapped in blankets, his breathing slow but steady. His face was pale, yet his eyes carried more life than before. When he saw Aveline, he lifted his hand in welcome. "Come closer, child," he said. Aveline stepped forward, her hands clasped together. For a moment, the king simply looked at her, not with fear, not with judgment, but with something that looked like regret. "I heard what you did," he said. "Lady Sarah told me everything. You saved this kingdom when we had turned our backs on you." Aveline swallowed, unsure how to respond. I only followed what my dreams showed me." "Yes," the king murmured. "Dreams we feared, dreams we punished you for." He lowered his gaze, his voice heavy. "I allowed fear to guide me instead of wisdom. For that, I am sorry." Aveline's chest tightened. She had wanted an apology once, needed it even. But now, standing here, she felt something different. She felt tired. She felt older than she had been just one day ago. "You were afraid," she said quietly. "Everyone was. I don't blame you." The king looked up, surprised by her kindness. "Even so, your courage has shown us the truth. Our old beliefs blinded us. They kept us chained to superstition instead of understanding." He reached out, and Aveline stepped close enough for him to take her hand. "Alaris owes you a debt," he said. "A great one." Aveline felt warmth spread through her chest. Not pride exactly, but something gentler. Something healing. Outside the palace, people were already talking. Some questioned their fear of dreamers. Others wondered what the kingdom could become if it embraced the very things it once chased away. The change was small, fragile, but real. Aveline stepped back from the king and looked toward the tall windows where the morning light finally broke through the smoke. The night was over, and though the kingdom still trembled, it was no longer on the edge of destruction. It was standing, because she had stood. The sun rose brighter the next morning, cutting through the last traces of smoke drifting above the palace. For the first time in what felt like ages, the light touching the kingdom didn't feel harsh or warning. It felt warm, like a promise of something new. Aveline stood on the palace balcony, watching workers and guards move together across the courtyard. They carried buckets of water, cleared debris, and patched stone walls. Their movements were slow and tired, but there was hope in them too. A quiet strength. She hadn't slept since the battle, but she didn't feel weighed down. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as if the storm in her heart had finally begun to settle. Behind her, gentle footsteps approached. Lady Sarah stepped beside her. "The king is forming a council for rebuilding," she said. "He wants you there, not as a servant, but as an advisor." Aveline blinked in surprise. "An advisor? Me?" Sarah nodded. "Your dreams warned us. Your courage saved us. You see the world differently, and that's what we need now." Aveline looked out at the kingdom again. Once, these walls had felt like a cage, a place she didn't belong, a place that feared her. Now they seemed softer, almost welcoming. But another image appeared in her mind, the faces of the remnants. The people who had taken her in when she had nothing. The people who had seen her as human long before Alaris did. They were still out there, relying on her promise to return. "What if I want to help them too?" Aveline asked quietly. Sarah smiled. "Then do both. Nothing says you must choose one family over another." Aveline felt her chest loosen, relief blooming through her. Maybe she didn't have to split her life in two. Maybe she could build a bridge instead, one that connected the kingdom to those forgotten by it. Later that day, the king met with her once more. His voice was steady, his expression hopeful. "You will always have a place here," he told her, "but your path is your own to choose." Aveline stepped outside after the meeting, letting the warm breeze touch her face. For the first time in years, her mind felt quiet, peaceful. That night, as she finally drifted into sleep, she dreamed again. But this dream was different. There was no fire, no shadows, no falling throne. Instead, she saw Ilaris filled with light, fields growing green again, laughter returning to the streets, and people walking side by side without fear. It wasn't a warning. It was a beginning. It was hope, and Aveline embraced it.